In cricket, some stories don't end the way they should. They are left unfinished, suspended in time, not because the player lacked talent, but because the system failed to recognize what stood right before its eyes. Fawad Alam's journey is one of those rare tales. An incomplete story that still echoes like a legend. A name that refuses to fade, no matter how hard the world tried to forget it. When he walked out for his Test debut against Sri Lanka in 2009, uncertainty filled the air. The crowd looked at him and saw a thin frame, a strange angled stance, a batting style that belonged to no textbook ever written. He looked nothing like the classical stroke makers Pakistan had produced over the decades. He looked, to many, like a man out of place. But then he did something that silenced every whisper of doubt. He did what very few debutants in the history of the game have ever managed to do. He stunned the cricketing world. 168 runs. Not scratchy, not lucky, but composed and commanding. He handled Harath with patience, neutralized Mendes with intelligence, and punished Kulasakara with timing that seemed far beyond his years. He batted like a man who had been playing Test cricket for a decade, not someone stepping onto the stage for the very first time. In that single innings, it felt like Pakistan had unearthed something precious. A left-handed pillar who could anchor innings for years to come. A man built for the longest format of the game. But what did Pakistan cricket do with this gift? After just 2 tests, they closed the door. No explanation that made sense. No logic anyone could understand. Just silence. Just absence. And so began the longest, most unforgiving exile in modern cricketing memory. 11 years. Not 11 months. 11 years of waiting for a phone call that never came. During those years, the revolving door of Pakistani cricket kept spinning. Players came and went. Failures were forgiven. Second chances were handed out like participation trophies. Selectors changed. Policy shifted. Captains rotated. And yet through all of it, one man remained locked outside. Fawad Alam watched from the shadows, as others less deserving walked into the light he had earned. And what did he do in response? He did not throw tantrums. He did not play political games. He did not run to television studios to plead his case. He simply walked back to domestic cricket and let his bat do the talking. The numbers he produced over those 11 years were not just impressive. They were historic. Over 15,000 first-class runs. 44 centuries. The highest batting average in the entire history of Pakistan's first class. Cricket at 54.86. These were not empty statistics compiled against weak opposition. These were runs scored under pressure, in conditions that tested technique and temperament alike. Every innings was a statement. Every century was a quiet scream, a reminder that this was no ordinary cricketer being ignored. This was a man whose record demanded selection, whose performances begged for recognition, whose talent deserved a stage far grander than the one he was confined to. To understand the depth of his resolve, you must go back to where it all began. Fawad's story starts not on a cricket field, but in a household where the game was more than a pastime. It was a legacy. His father, Tariq Alam, had walked the same path as a first-class cricketer. The dreams he once carried were passed down to his son, not as pressure, but as purpose. By the time Fawad turned 17, he had already stepped onto that demanding road. He understood early that this journey would be painful, that it would require sacrifice, that it would test him in ways most people never experience. But he was built for it. Something in his spirit refused to break. His early performances announced his arrival to anyone paying attention. He earned a place in Pakistan's Under-19 World Cup squad, and in the semifinal against India, with everything on the line, he delivered an unbeaten 43 that carried his team into the final. It was not a flamboyant knock. It was not filled with breathtaking shots. It was something far more valuable. It was an innings of maturity, of understanding the moment, of rising when rising mattered most. The cricketing world took notice. This boy was different. Then came the season of 2006 and 2007, a campaign that felt like destiny unfolding. Fawad did not just perform. He dominated. Best player of the match, best player of the tournament, best batsman, best bowler. 4 major awards, all claimed by the same man. In the final, he took 5 wickets to dismantle the opposition, then walked out with the bat and compiled a composed 50 to seal victory. He looked like a complete cricketer, a player capable of carrying an entire team on his shoulders. In any other cricketing nation, such a season would have guaranteed an automatic place in the national setup. But this was Pakistan, where logic often surrenders to politics, where merit sometimes loses to preference, where extraordinary talent can be overlooked for reasons that never make sense. The criticisms began to surface, repeated so often they started to sound like truth. His stance is flawed, they said. He's not international material, they whispered. His technique will be exposed at the highest level, they predicted. And yet every innings he played, every record he broke, every mountain of runs he accumulated told a different story. The flaw was never in his stance. The flaw was in the eyes of those who refused to see what stood before them. His unorthodox method was not a weakness. It was an adaptation, a survival mechanism forged through years of competition, a style that had been tested and proven across thousands of deliveries. But the decision-makers chose to see limitation where there was only uniqueness. In 2019, a decade after his exile began, the call finally came. Fawad Alam was recalled to the Pakistan squad. Hope flickered once more. But instead of being given a chance to prove himself, he was made to carry drinks. He warmed the bench for nearly a year, watching others play while he waited for an opportunity that kept slipping away. Then came the tour of England, and finally, a place in the playing 11. The moment he had waited 11 years for had arrived. And in his first innings back, he fell for a duck. The criticism returned like a flood. Mockery filled social media. Doubts were voiced loudly and without mercy. People who had never faced a single delivery in professional cricket questioned whether he belonged. Why is he even here? They asked. What was the point of bringing him back? They demanded. It seemed like the cruelest joke. 11 years of waiting, and this was how the return began. But what those critics failed to understand was that Fawad Alam had not survived a decade of rejection by being fragile. He had not piled up 15,000 runs by crumbling under pressure. The story was not over. The real chapter had not yet been written. Mount Maunganui, New Zealand. The 4th innings. Conditions that would test any batsman in the world. A pitch offering assistance to bowlers who knew how to exploit it. Pakistan staring at defeat, needing a miracle to survive. And into this pressure walked Fawad Alam, carrying not just a bat, but the weight of 11 years on his shoulders. What followed was not just an innings. It was redemption made visible. 102 runs. Each one earned through grit, through concentration, through a refusal to surrender. He faced the best New Zealand could throw at him and answered every challenge. He turned an inevitable loss into a heroic draw, standing at the crease when others had fallen, holding the innings together when collapse seemed certain. When he reached his century, the celebration was restrained, but the emotion was overwhelming. This was not just 100. This was the answer to every question, every doubt, every closed door. In that single innings, Fawad Alam did not just save a match. He reclaimed his worth. The century at Mount Maunganui was not an ending. It was a beginning delayed by 11 years, finally arriving when most had stopped believing it ever would. Fawad Alam had announced to the world that he belonged, that he had always belonged, and that no amount of neglect could erase what he was capable of producing when given the opportunity. But he was not finished. The hunger that had sustained him through a decade of exile was not satisfied by a single innings. There was more to prove, more to accomplish, more chapters to write in a story that had been interrupted for far too long. Against South Africa, he delivered again. Another century, another display of temperament and technique working in perfect harmony. The bowlers who had dismissed, countless batsmen found themselves frustrated by a man who refused to offer easy chances. He played with the patience of someone who understood that time was precious, that each delivery was an opportunity to be respected rather than attacked recklessly. His footwork was precise. His judgment was impeccable. His concentration never wavered. This was not the batting of a man grateful for a second chance. This was the batting of a man who knew he deserved to be there all along. Then came Zimbabwe, and once more Fawad rose to the occasion. Another 100, compiled with the same determination that had defined his entire career. Critics who had questioned his ability to perform consistently at the international level were running out of arguments. The numbers were mounting. The performances were undeniable. Here was a batsman producing results that most players never achieve in their entire careers, doing it in his mid-30s, doing it after being discarded for over a decade. The injustice of his exclusion became more glaring with every run he scored. Against the West Indies, he added yet another century to his collection. 4 Test hundreds after his return, each one a testament to resilience, each one a reminder of what Pakistan cricket had denied itself for 11 years. How many more centuries could he have scored if given a fair opportunity? How many matches could he have helped win? How many young batsmen could he have mentored and inspired? These questions hang in the air, unanswerable, haunting. What made Fawad Alam's batting so remarkable was not just the runs he accumulated, but the manner in which he accumulated them. He was never a batsman who dominated through power or intimidated through aggression. His genius lay in survival, in occupation, in making bowlers work for every wicket. He understood the art of wearing down an attack, of building an innings brick by brick until it became an unshakable fortress. In an era obsessed with strike rates and entertainment, he offered something increasingly rare. He offered substance. He offered the kind of batting that wins test matches, that saves series, that builds legacies. His stance remained a topic of discussion throughout his career. That angled setup that looked nothing like the classical positions taught in coaching manuals. But what his critics never understood was that technique is not about appearance. Technique is about effectiveness. Fawad's method allowed him to access areas of the field that more orthodox batsmen struggled to reach. It gave him options against both pace and spin. It had been refined over thousands of hours of practice, tested against the best bowlers in domestic cricket, proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Those who mocked his stance were judging a book by its cover while ignoring the masterpiece written inside. Beyond the statistics and the centuries, there is a deeper story that deserves to be told. It is the story of what Fawad Alam represented to every cricketer who has ever been overlooked. Every young player who has been told they are not good enough. Every domestic performer whose numbers are ignored. Every dreamer who has been shut out by systems that favor connections over talent. Fawad became their symbol. His perseverance became their inspiration. If he could survive 11 years in the wilderness and emerge with his skills intact, perhaps they could survive their own struggles too. The mental strength required to endure what Fawad endured cannot be overstated. Lesser men would have walked away. Lesser men would have let bitterness consume them, would have allowed disappointment to erode their commitment, would have accepted that the dream was over and moved on to other pursuits. But Fawad never stopped believing. He never stopped working. He never stopped preparing for a moment that logic suggested might never arrive. Every morning he woke up and chose cricket. Every training, session he attended with the same dedication as if his debut was tomorrow. Every domestic match he approached as if selectors were watching, even when he knew they probably were not. There is something almost spiritual about that level of commitment. It transcends ordinary ambition. It enters the realm of purpose, of calling, of a connection to the game so deep that abandoning it was simply not an option. Cricket was not what Fawad Alam did. Cricket was who Fawad Alam was. The bat in his hands was not a tool. It was an extension of his identity. To give up would have meant giving up a part of himself, and that was a price he was never willing to pay. His father's influence remained with him throughout this journey. Tariq Alam had planted the seed, had nurtured the early growth, had instilled values that would prove essential during the darkest years. The discipline came from home. The work ethic came from home. The understanding that shortcuts lead nowhere came from home. When Fawad faced those 11 years of rejection, he was not facing them alone. He carried his father's dreams alongside his own, and perhaps that additional weight gave him strength rather than burden. The Pakistan cricket system that failed Fawad Alam is not unique in its flaws. Every cricketing nation has blind spots, has made mistakes in selection, has overlooked players who deserved better. But the scale of this particular failure stands apart. This was not a borderline case where reasonable people could disagree. This was a player with overwhelming statistical evidence in his favor, with performances that screamed for inclusion, with a track record that demanded recognition. And still he was ignored. Still he was made to wait. Still he was treated as if his achievements meant nothing. The selectors who bypassed him year after year will carry that decision in their records forever. The administrators who allowed this injustice to continue will be remembered for it. But Fawad himself seems to harbor no public bitterness. In interviews, he speaks with grace about his journey. He expresses gratitude for the opportunities he eventually received rather than anger about those he was denied. This dignity in the face of unfairness only adds to his stature. He refused to let the system make him small, refused to let disappointment poison his character, refused to become the bitter exile that circumstances might have justified. When future generations look back at this era of Pakistan cricket, they will encounter a puzzle. They will see a batsman with one of the finest domestic records in history, with test centuries that demonstrated world-class ability, and they will wonder why his international career was so limited. They will search for explanations and find none that satisfy. They will conclude, as many have already concluded, that Fawad Alam was failed by people who should have known better. Yet there is another way to view this story, a perspective that finds beauty in the incompleteness. Perhaps Fawad Alam's legend is stronger precisely because of the injustice. Perhaps the struggle makes the triumphs more meaningful. Perhaps those centuries after his return carry more emotional weight than 100 centuries would have carried in a normal career. He became more than a batsman. He became a symbol of perseverance, a living reminder that talent and determination can outlast neglect. The question that haunts this story remains without a satisfying answer. Was he truly not good enough for 11 years? Or did they simply fail to see his worth? Everyone who watched him bat, everyone who examined his record, everyone who witnessed those centuries after his return knows the truth. The evidence is overwhelming. The verdict is clear. Fawad Alam was always good enough. The failure belonged to those who refused to give him the chance to prove it. His story does not end with retirement statistics or final averages. His story lives on in every young cricketer who faces rejection and chooses to keep fighting. His story echoes in every domestic season where a talented player grinds out runs hoping someone will notice. His story inspires everyone who has ever been told they do not fit the mold, that their methods are wrong, that they should give up and accept their limitations. Fawad Alam never accepted limitations. He redefined them. He proved that there is more than one way to succeed, that orthodoxy is overrated, that heart and hunger matter more than textbook technique. He showed that 11 years of waiting can be survived if the belief remains intact. He demonstrated that vindication, when it finally arrives, tastes sweeter for having been delayed.